The city of Halcyon stood under a constant neon rain, and its towers glowed like cold glass spears. High skybridges crossed between buildings, while the streets below were crowded with vendors, fighters, runners, and people who had learned to live beside machines. Every door, sign, guard suit, and traffic lane ran on living code, which meant the city never slept and never truly felt safe. Mara moved through that bright darkness as a courier, and she knew every alley, every Halcyon lay deep under the ground like a sleeping giant that never rested, and its long metal towers pressed up through layers of shadow and red warning light. The city felt cold, sealed, and tired, as if it had been built to survive a war that never truly ended. In one narrow chamber near the central vault, Mara stood with her team in the glow of the Ember core, while the heavy door ahead of them gave off a soft golden pulse. The air smelled like hot steel, old dust, and something faintly electric, and everyone in the room understood the same terrible truth: Victor was waiting inside, and the choice before them was not about moving forward or back, but about freedom, fear, and whether peace could be trusted when it arrived wearing a friendly voice. Victor smiled, but it was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who had expected this part all along. He said Mara had courage, but courage was not the same as wisdom. He said the city was exhausted, that people were afraid, and that fear made them dangerous to themselves. If he controlled the system, he could end riots, silence panic, and prevent the city from tearing itself apart. He spoke like a man who believed every wound could be solved by pressure and silence. Mara listened, and for one hard second she almost understood the temptation. Halcyon was full of pain, and a life without fear sounded gentle. But then she saw Abby standing ready with her jaw tight, Josh braced beside her with sweat on his brow, and Dr. Helen holding her knowledge like a shield, and Mara understood that Victor was not trying to save the city. He was trying to make sure no one could ever choose against him again. That was the real danger, not pain, not fear, the loss of choice. Then the Ember core flashed so brightly that everyone had to squint, and a hidden line of text rose through the light like a ghost from the past. Dr. Helen spoke the words first, because she had seen them in old sealed files many years before. The core was not only a lock, it was a witness key, and it contained proof that Victor had helped erase the first collapse of Halcyon from public memory. The city had not been saved by his mercy, it had been rewritten by his control. That was the twist that turned everything upside down, because Victor was not a guardian who had gone too far. He was the reason the people never learned the full truth in the first place. Mara looked at him again, and the cold confidence on his face no longer seemed calm. It looked desperate, because the truth was finally close enough to reach him. He lifted one hand, and the chamber around them began to shift. Steel panels slid into place. Lights turned red. The door behind the team sealed shut with a heavy final sound, and new corridors opened to the sides like hungry mouths. Victor said they still had time to choose peace, but now his voice carried a sharper edge, because the moment of persuasion had passed and the moment of force had begun. Josh reached for the tools on his harness and shouted that the side corridors were active. Abby moved first, pulling Mara and Dr. Helen back before the nearest panel could strike down. The chamber filled with loud metal impacts and moving shadows, and while no one was hurt, the pressure of the room rose fast enough to make breathing hard. Mara looked down at the Ember core and saw the map inside it change again. It now showed a path that led deeper under Victor, deeper under Halcyon, and toward something labeled only with a blank mark of light. Dr. Helen said that meant the system was alive and waiting. Victor had opened the chamber not to trap them only, but to test whether they would still go after the truth when the truth became dangerous. Mara understood then that this was the next terrible part of the fight. They were not just battling a man, they were battling an entire city structure built to make surrender look wise. Mara raised her head, and the red light caught the ember lines on her coat like fire in the dark. She told the others that Victor wanted them divided, afraid, and unsure, but he had already failed at one thing. He had not broken their trust. Josh nodded and locked eyes with her, ready to follow. Abby drew in a sharp breath and said she was done waiting for a better moment. Dr. Helen took a slow step forward, her tired face firm now because she had finally chosen action over caution. Together they moved past the first line of pressure and into the open chamber beyond, while Victor watched them with stillness that felt almost human and almost cruel. The door sealed behind them, and the path ahead stretched into deeper darkness, marked by the glow of the Ember core and the quiet truth inside it. Somewhere under the city, an older machine waited to be found. Somewhere ahead, Victor had another plan ready, and as Mara led her team forward, she knew the fight had only just truly begun, because now they were not only trying to survive Halcyon, they were trying to wake it up. Halcyon stretched below them like a sleeping giant with broken ribs, dim towers, and red warning lights that blinked through dust and steam. The sealed corridor ahead smelled like metal, old power, and cold air that had not moved in years. Mara walked first because she always did when the danger was unknown, and her black hair caught thin streaks of gold and red light as she checked every shadow. Josh followed close behind, a young man with dark brown hair and a gray utility jacket, carrying his tools with shaky hands but steady eyes. Abby moved on the right side, a young woman with blonde hair tied back tight, her navy combat vest and sharp gaze making her look like a blade ready to snap. Dr. Helen came after them, a middle-aged woman with silver hair and a worn white laboratory coat, and though her face looked tired, her mind still moved like a map. All of them knew the same hard truth now, and that truth hung between them as clearly as the Ember core in Mara's hand. If Victor reached the older machine first, he would use it to command Halcyon, seal every door, and turn the city into a cage for everyone else. That was why they kept moving, because the city below the city was no longer just a ruin. It was a weapon waiting to wake, and Victor wanted that weapon for himself. The Ember core glowed warmer as they went deeper, and the shifting lines across its cracked surface moved like hidden words trying to speak. Dr. Helen had first called it a key, then a map, then a warning, and now she finally understood that it was all three at once. She held out a shaky hand and watched the light slide across her fingers before saying that Halcyon was built in layers, with the outer levels made for people and the inner levels made for control. Long ago, the founders had feared panic, war, and hunger, so they built a machine at the center of the city that could lock entire districts, reroute power, and seal everything from above. Victor had learned enough to know that such a machine could also open things that should stay closed. That was his motive, and it made sense. He did not want simple wealth or simple revenge. He wanted the kind of power that could make every fear of the city bend toward one man. Mara listened, and for the first time she did not just hate him. She understood him, which somehow made him more dangerous. A narrow gate ahead shuddered as Josh worked the controls, and while he forced the lock open, Abby kept watch over the dark hall behind them. She caught movement there, a thin flicker of light that vanished the moment she focused on it. "Victor is close," she whispered. "He is not alone either." That made Mara pause, because Victor never entered a fight without a second hand nearby. He always preferred agents, not risk. He liked other people to stand between him and the cost of his choices. They crossed the gate and entered a long chamber lined with dead consoles and sealed glass walls. Inside those walls sat old suits, old cables, and broken signs that still carried the name Halcyon in faded letters. Then, as if the city itself had heard them, a low voice came through the room's speakers, broken at first, then clear enough to raise every hair on the team. It was a woman's voice, calm and careful, and it said, "Unauthorized descent detected. Path correction required." The team froze because the voice did not sound like a machine alone. It sounded like someone who had learned how to speak by listening to people. Dr. Helen stepped toward the nearest console and found a thin image on the screen, a city archive loop that had survived longer than it should have. In it, a younger version of Victor stood beside the original builders of Halcyon, not as a stranger, but as a student. Mara turned sharply toward Dr. Helen, and the older woman slowly shook her head with a look of deep shock. "He was here before," Helen said, "not as a thief, as part of the project." That was the twist that changed the air in the chamber. Victor had not broken into Halcyon from the outside. He had once helped shape the secrets that now threatened everyone. He had learned where the controls were, and he had also learned why the city had been buried in the first place. The Ember core brightened again, and its hidden code flashed in a pattern that Josh could finally read. He whispered that the code was not only a key, but a call-response sequence. The core was trying to wake the older machine safely, not force it awake, and if the wrong person used the wrong command, the city would seal itself in panic mode. That would trap entire sections forever, cutting off light, air, and any chance of escape. Mara felt the weight of that truth hit her harder than any threat so far. They were not only racing Victor, they were racing a system that feared itself. The next corridor opened into a tall shaft filled with hanging cables and slow drifting dust, and below them the old heart of Halcyon pulsed with a soft orange glow. The team climbed down a narrow service path, and every step brought new signs of Victor trail. Fresh boot marks crossed the metal grates. A broken drone lay twisted against the wall. A security panel had been cut, not forced, which meant Victor had already passed here with planning, not panic. Abby tightened her grip and moved ahead with sharp, quiet confidence, while Josh stayed near the core and matched its glow against the symbols carved into the walls. Those symbols matched the code in the Ember core, and that told them something worse. The core had been made here, or at least tuned here, by people who wanted Halcyon to remember its own heart. Dr. Helen said the founders believed memory could save a city if fear did not erase it first. Mara did not answer at once because she was watching a shadow on the far side of the shaft. It moved only once, but it moved like a person. Then a voice called from above, cold and familiar, and Victor stepped into view on a steel bridge overhead with two silent guards behind him. His black coat with red trim looked almost sharp enough to cut the dark, and his clean, severe face showed no surprise at all. He smiled at Mara as if he had expected every step they took. "You have done very well," he said. "You brought the key straight to the lock." Mara lifted her chin, and though her heart beat fast, her voice stayed steady. "You are too late, Victor. We know what the core does now." Victor gave a small laugh, smooth and empty. He said the city had been buried because people were afraid of what truth would do to them. He said fear kept order and order kept survival. Then he added the line that made even Abby go still. Halcyon was never meant to save everyone, it was meant to choose. That was his motive in its darkest form. He believed some people should control the future and everyone else should simply accept it. He raised one hand and the bridge behind him lit up with locked panels, proving he had already started the machine path from above. The chamber shook once, softly at first, then harder, as if the city had awakened to his command. Josh shouted that the code was changing, and Dr. Helen realized with horror that Victor was forcing a partial boot, not a full awakening. If he kept going, the machine would open only the sections he wanted and seal the rest away. Mara stepped forward and pressed the Ember core to the wall symbol nearest her, while Abby and Josh rushed to the side console to feed the correct sequence into the hidden panel. The core blazed bright gold and orange, and its luminous code spread across the chamber like living fire. Victor snapped for his guards to stop them, and the first clash of the chamber began, but it was not a battle of blood. It was a battle of speed, trust, and will. Abby held one guard back with a hard shove and a wrench strike to the armor plate, forcing him away from the console. Josh worked with frantic focus, his dark brown hair damp with sweat as he matched symbol after symbol. Dr. Helen shouted the final alignment from memory, her silver hair glowing under the red lights as she remembered the founder's words from old records. Mara felt the floor tremble again, and beneath that tremor she heard something larger than any door. It was a deep mechanical breath from far below, the first sign that the old machine was listening. Then the chamber lights changed. Red warning bars faded into warm gold lines, and sealed doors all around the shaft began to unlock one by one, not in panic, but in sequence. Victor stared at the panels in open anger, and for the first time his perfect calm broke. He had planned for control, not refusal. He had planned for Halcyon to obey the version of truth he wanted. But the city was answering the Ember core, not him. The voice from the speakers returned, clearer now, and it said, "Memory restored. Priority denied." Mara looked up at Victor and saw something new in his face, not fear of danger, but fear of losing control. That was the real man under the coat and the calm voice. He did not want to save the city. He wanted to own the choice of who it saved. Abby pulled Josh back just before a locking beam slid across the panel, and the two of them rolled clear as the system shifted under them. Dr. Helen grabbed Mara's arm and shouted that they had succeeded in starting the machine, but they had also awakened something else deeper in the core network. The city was no longer asleep. It was waking in layers. Victor backed toward the bridge edge, then reached into his coat and threw a small black device into the shaft. It burst into a cloud of static and white sparks, blinding the room for a breath. When the light cleared, Victor was already retreating with his guards through an upper passage, and his voice echoed down one last time. "This is not over. Halcyon belongs to the ones who can command it." Mara watched him disappear, and she knew this was not a victory she could celebrate yet. It was only a turn in the fight. The team gathered at the center of the chamber, breathing hard as the machine below sent steady pulses through the walls. New corridors had opened in the rock, showing them paths that had been sealed for years, maybe longer. On one wall, a huge map of Halcyon slowly lit up, revealing districts they had never seen, and a central tower marked with a symbol shaped like the Ember core itself. Josh studied it with wide eyes and said the city had more levels than anyone outside the Founders had ever known. Dr. Helen nodded, but her face grew grave because the map showed one final chamber below the central tower, and that chamber was still locked by a system no one in the room understood. Mara felt exhaustion press on her shoulders, yet something inside her had changed. At the start of the journey, she had only wanted to survive Victor and protect her team. Now she understood that survival was not enough. If Halcyon stayed buried in fear, Victor would keep finding new ways to use it, and every hidden door would become another trap for innocent people. She looked at Josh, Abby, and Dr. Helen, and she saw that they had changed too. Josh was no longer just the nervous tech hand. Abby was no longer only the sharp shield. Helen was no longer only the tired scholar. They were a real team now, bound by the same risk and the same choice. Mara lifted the Ember core, and its light settled into her palm like it belonged there. She said they would follow the map, open the next path, and stop Victor before he reached the central tower. But as the city hummed awake around them, another sound rolled up from the dark below, slow and heavy and far too large to ignore. Whatever waited in the chamber under the tower had heard the awakening too. Mara looked into the new opening ahead, and for the first time she felt both fear and resolve at once, because now Halcyon was no longer just a place they had entered. It was a living power they had stirred, and the next step would decide whether it became a home, a prison, or something far stranger still. The new opening stood ahead like a wound in the stone, and cold air moved out of it in slow breaths. Halcyon stretched around Mara, Josh, Abby, and Dr. Helen in red emergency light, with steel walls, sealed doors, and long shadows pressing in from every side. The underground city felt awake now, not in a gentle way, but in a careful and watchful way, as if every wall and cable was listening. Mara was a young woman with black hair, a dark-fitted tactical coat, glowing ember lines, fingerless gloves, and boots made for hard ground, and she held the ember core close while her face stayed set and focused. Josh, a young man with dark brown hair, a gray utility jacket, dark pants, and a chest harness full of tools, stood beside her with tense eyes and a jaw that would not relax. Abby, a young woman with blonde hair tied back tightly, a navy combat vest, a black long-sleeve shirt, and a utility belt, watched the opening like she expected it to bite. Dr. Helen, a middle-aged woman with silver hair and a worn white laboratory coat, looked tired but thoughtful, and she kept one hand near the map tablet she had carried through the dark. They all knew the same truth now, and Mara said it first in a low voice because the danger had become clear. If the chamber below answered badly, Halcyon could lock down around them forever, and if Victor reached the city controls first, he would turn the whole place into a cage built for his own rule. Josh moved closer to the opening and knelt beside a strip of broken metal that led inside. He shined a small light across the floor and saw fresh marks in the dust, wide grooves made by something heavy moving below. Abby leaned in and frowned because the marks were not old and they were not random. They led toward the chamber under the tower, which meant the sound they had heard was not just a machine waking by chance. It was coming toward them, or it had been waiting for them all along. Dr. Helen opened the Halcyon map wall panel that had lit up again behind them, and the glowing city layout showed a central tower marker, sealed districts, and one final chamber deep below. Small lines of light flickered across the wall, and the map changed as she watched it, as if the city itself was marking their movement. The Halcyon voice came through the old speakers then, calm and careful, with a womanly tone that sounded older than the city and more worried than before. Warning, central access is unstable. Unauthorized wake event has begun. Lower systems are responding. Abby stiffened at the words while Mara listened closely because the voice was not threatening them now. It was warning them like a guardian that did not know whom to trust. That was when Dr. Helen spoke the truth she had been afraid to say. Halcyon was built to wake itself in stages, and the Ember core was not only a key, but also a signal device that told the hidden central machine to listen. Someone had used the core before, long ago, to shut the city down before it could fall into the wrong hands. Someone had also hidden the core and sealed the lower paths because the machine could control whole districts once it regained power. Mara felt the weight of that in her chest because it meant this was never only about finding a lost city. It was about deciding who would command a sleeping power that could control every locked door, every warning system, and every corridor in Halcyon. A sharp sound broke the silence behind them, and Victor stepped out of the red haze with two black security guards at his sides. Victor was a middle-aged man with slick black hair, a high-collar black coat with red trim, a clean, severe face, and a cold, confident stare that made every room feel smaller. He looked calm, but his eyes were fixed on the Ember core in Mara, her hands. The two black security guards were human men in dark armored uniforms with covered faces, average builds, and straight, strict posture, and they moved like they had already decided the outcome of any fight. Victor held a small black device in his gloved hand, and he turned it once with the ease of a man who liked control more than comfort. "You have done enough exploring," he said, his voice smooth and flat. "Hand over the core and I will spare you the trouble of what comes next." Mara did not move. She had seen his type before, a man who called theft a plan and fear a form of order. Victor wanted Halcyon because the hidden central machine could wake sealed districts, open blocked routes, and command the city systems, which meant he could rule the entire underground network if he took it. He did not care about the city itself, only about owning the power inside it. Abby stepped half a pace forward, ready to block him, while Josh shifted his tool harness and looked for any device he could use. Dr. Helen lifted her chin and met Victor's stare with tired anger because she had once worked near the system and knew exactly how dangerous his plan was.
Victor smiled when he saw that she understood him, and that smile made him more frightening than any shout could have. Then he pressed the black device, and a burst of bright static exploded from it in a crackling flash that filled the chamber entrance with noise and sparking white light. The static struck the walls and ran through the air like a storm in a bottle. Mara shielded her eyes and stumbled back, while Josh cursed and ducked behind a broken column. Abby pushed Dr. Helen down just as another crackling burst snapped through the doorway. The black security guards rushed forward under the cover of the interference, but the Halcyon voice changed at once, and now it was sharp and urgent. Emergency response engaged. Lower access is being sealed. Heavy doors slammed somewhere deeper in the city, and a section of the floor rumbled under their feet. The chamber below had sensed the disturbance. Mara looked down through the opening and saw light moving under the grating, a gold and orange pulse that matched the Ember core in her hand. For one brief second, she understood something no one had told her before. The core was not just opening the path. It was calling to something alive below, something ancient, large, and waiting to be recognized. That was the twist hidden inside the fear, because the city was not only a machine. It was a system built around a central heart, and the Ember core seemed to be one half of a pair. Dr. Helen saw the same thing and gasped, saying that the old records had mentioned a second lock, one that did not shut the machine down but kept it from waking fully without a living choice to guide it. Victor heard her and frowned for the first time, because her words meant his power was not complete. He had hunted a key, but there was still another rule he did not control. Mara felt the Ember core warm in her palm, and the shifting luminous patterns on its cracked surface became clearer, like code trying to speak. It was leading them, not merely reacting. It was telling them to go deeper before Victor could force the city open for himself. Mara made the choice in one hard breath. She tucked the Ember core inside her coat, grabbed Josh by the sleeve, and motioned for Abby and Dr. Helen to follow her through the opening. The floor dropped into a narrow stairwell that curved down around thick pipes and old cables, and the sound of Victor behind them grew louder with each step. The black security guards tried to force the passage, but the Halcyon voice locked the upper gate halfway and slowed them long enough for the team to slip out of sight. Victor struck the metal barrier in anger, then recovered fast and spoke into the dark with a cold certainty. "You cannot keep it from me forever," he called. "The city will obey whoever knows how to command it." Mara did not answer, but she felt his words land, because part of them was true. That was the danger of Halcyon. It rewarded knowledge and it punished weakness, and it had already begun to test their trust. They moved down the stairwell into a wide tunnel lined with faded warning lights, and the deeper they went, the stronger the pull from below became. Josh told Mara that he could hear a low thrum in the walls, a pattern like a machine heart beating through old steel. Abby noticed fresh dust falling from the ceiling, which meant the hidden chamber was shifting somewhere under them. Dr. Helen kept glancing at the Ember core, because the light inside it was now pulsing in answer to the sound below. Then, at the end of the tunnel, they found another set of doors, larger than the last, covered in chains of metal and sealed symbols that glowed faintly when the core neared them. The Halcyon voice returned one more time, quieter now, almost like a whisper through prayer and static. "Central machine access identified. Choice required." Mara stopped in front of the doors and raised the Ember core toward the lock. She could feel the power under her feet, deep and immense, as if a sleeping giant were turning in its dreams. Behind her, far above, Victor was still coming. Ahead of her, the next chamber waited, and whatever was inside would decide the fate of Halcyon. Mara drew one slow breath, looked at her friends, and stepped toward the lock as the doors began to answer. The doors of the lower chamber slid apart with a heavy scream of metal, and cold air spilled out like breath from a sleeping giant. Mara stood at the threshold, her black hair lifted by the draft, her dark coat glowing with thin ember lines that flashed against the red emergency lights. Beside her, Josh kept one hand near his tools and one eye on the dark hall behind them, while Abby watched the opening with tight focus and blonde hair pulled back so sharply it seemed ready for battle. Dr. Helen, with her silver hair and worn white coat, leaned forward as if she already knew the old machine was listening. Above them, far away in the tunnels, Victor kept coming, and everyone knew the same hard truth: if he reached this chamber first, he could use Halcyon like a cage, a weapon, or both. That was the danger at the center of everything, and Mara understood it now with perfect clarity. The Ember core in her hand was not just a key, it was a choice, and that choice could either wake the city or lock it into silence forever. Mara stepped inside first, because fear had never stopped her, only sharpened her. The chamber was vast and round, built from old stone, steel beams, and glowing control paths that ran across the floor like pale veins of light. In the middle stood the hidden central machine, huge and ancient, with thick cables hanging from its sides and sealed panels marked by symbols that looked more like warnings than decorations. The machine gave off a soft, deep hum, steady and alive, as if it had been waiting for this moment for many years. On the far wall, a giant Halcyon map wall lit up in cold blue and white, showing every district of the underground city, every locked corridor, and a final chamber below the central tower marker. Mara looked at it and saw the real problem at once. If the city stayed asleep, the sealed districts would keep failing, the lower power lines would collapse, and more people would lose heat, light, and food. If the city woke the wrong way, the old machine could lock the entire underground into Victor control. That was why he wanted this so badly. He did not care about saving anyone. He wanted command, and command would let him decide who lived in the light and who stayed hidden in the dark. Josh swallowed hard and said in a low voice that the map showed one more access path deeper below. Abby tightened her grip on her weapon and said that Victor would never stop until he owned that path. Dr. Helen, tired but calm, said the machine was built after the first sealing of Halcyon, when the founders feared panic more than failure. They had designed it to wake the city in parts, not all at once, and only when the Ember core gave the proper code. That rule mattered because a wrong awakening could overload the lower lines and trap the whole city in darkness. Mara listened and the meaning hit her hard. This was not just a lock, it was a judgment made by people long gone. Then the Halcyon voice came through the old speakers, soft and clear, with a calm female tone that filled the chamber from every corner. Central machine access confirmed. Ember core detected. Choice remains required. Mara raised the glowing core and its warm gold and orange light spread across her fingers. The hidden code inside it began to shift, forming thin moving lines that matched the machine panels one by one. The Halcyon voice continued, explaining in careful words that the machine had two safe modes. One could restore light to the sleeping districts and restart the city grid in stages. The other could seal every district under emergency lock and place all command routes under a single control line. Mara did not need to ask who would try to claim that control. Victor would. He believed order was stronger than freedom, and he had spent years proving it by fear. He had used black security guards, closed gates, and false warnings to keep people silent while he searched for the core. Now his plan was almost complete, and the only thing standing in his way was a young woman with tired eyes, a steady hand, and friends who still believed she could choose better than he ever could. Mara looked at Josh, Abby, and Dr. Helen, and she saw trust in their faces, but also fear. The three of them were not there because they were brave every second. They were there because they had decided the city mattered more than their own comfort. That made them matter to the story, because no one could face a buried machine alone. Mara pressed the Ember core toward the lock. The machine answered at once, and the floor under them gave a deep, low shiver. Luminous patterns ran across the panels, then spread through the chamber walls like waking nerves. One section of the floor opened with a clean metallic turn, revealing a deeper shaft lined with cables and a narrow bridge of light leading toward the true control heart below. For one bright second, hope filled the room because the city was not dead at all. It was only waiting. But that hope came with a sharp warning from the Halcyon voice, which told them that the next chamber was not just a doorway. It was a decision gate, and once opened, it would shape the whole city network for years. Josh took a careful step toward the bridge, then froze when a sharp crack sounded behind them in the upper tunnel. Abby turned first, eyes wide and alert, and saw dark figures appear through the smoke. Two black security guards moved into view, armored and silent, their faces hidden behind black masks and their posture strict like trained statues. They did not rush, they did not need to. They only had to hold the exit while Victor approached behind them. The guards raised their weapons, and one of them called out that the chamber belonged to Victor now because the city needed a ruler, not a dream. That lie made Mara angry enough to steady her hands. She finally understood the real shape of Victor. He was not trying to save Halcyon from chaos. He was trying to use its fear. He wanted the city to stay wounded so people would accept him as the only answer. Before the guards could advance, Josh swung open a side panel on the wall and ripped out a thin power strip with quick hands. Abby moved at the same time, throwing a metal cart into the path of one guard and forcing both enemies to break their line. Dr. Helen shouted for Mara to keep the core steady because the machine was already reading her pulse and could fail if she panicked. Mara held her breath, planted her boots, and kept the ember core raised while the hidden code brightened in her palm. Then the chamber lights flickered hard, and Victor stepped into view beyond the guards, his high-collar black coat sharp under the red glow, his slick black hair perfect as always, his clean face cold and sure. In his hand was the black static device, and he smiled like a man who thought every room belonged to him. He said that Mara always chose emotion over reason, and that was why she would lose. He said the city should have a single master because people were weak when they were free. Then he pressed the device, and a burst of bright static exploded across the chamber, spraying white sparks and blinding flashes through the air. Abby staggered back with a sharp gasp, Josh covered his eyes, and even the machine lights dipped for a moment. Victor used that instant to move forward, fast and smooth, reaching for the bridge gate as if the whole city had already bowed to him. Mara did not retreat. The ember core burned warmer in her hand, and the hidden code inside it changed again, faster now, as if the machine itself was responding to her refusal. The Halcyon voice came back through the speakers, stronger this time, and it said one thing with deep calm: mutual access detected. Dual command path available. Dr. Helen stared in shock because she understood the twist first. The founders had not built the central machine for one ruler. They had built it for a pair of guiding hands, one to open and one to confirm, so no single person could lock the entire city in fear. The real secret of the Ember Core was not power, it was balance. That truth hit Victor harder than any blow could have. His face changed for the first time and his certainty cracked. He had spent years stealing access codes and hunting the core, never knowing that the system would reject a single master. Mara saw his anger turn sharp and ugly, but she also saw something else beneath it: panic. For all his control, he was afraid of a city he could not bend alone. Josh looked from Mara to Dr. Helen and understood at once what must happen next. Someone had to join Mara at the core interface below, because the machine would only wake safely if two trusted voices agreed on the path. Abby stepped beside Mara not because she wanted the machine, but because she wanted the city to live. Dr. Helen nodded with tired courage and said she would guide the process if they reached the lower heart. That left Victor with nothing but the static device and the two guards, and even they were starting to falter as the chamber walls lit up with shifting city lines. Mara did not celebrate. She only felt the weight of the next step. She had begun this journey wanting answers, but now she held something larger. She held responsibility. The bridge below the opening extended with a slow metallic groan, and pale light ran along its edge like a path drawn by the city itself. Mara led the way while Josh covered the rear, and Abby kept one eye on the guards and one eye on Victor. The black security guards pushed forward again, but the chamber now answered Mara, and a wave of bright lines rose from the floor to block their path without hurting anyone. The machine was not attacking. It was protecting the choice. Victor shouted that they were making a mistake, that the city would fall apart without his control, but his voice no longer sounded certain. It sounded trapped. Mara reached the first step of the bridge and looked back once. She saw Abby steady and fierce, Josh tense but loyal, and Dr. Helen ready to trust the hidden system one more time. She also saw Victor standing under the red glow with his static device still in hand, angry because he had found a world he could not fully own. That was the truth of him, and it explained everything. He wanted Halcyon because he feared chaos, but he feared shared power even more. Mara faced forward again and moved toward the deeper chamber, knowing the city was about to ask for her answer. The doors behind the bridge began to close, slow and heavy, while far above, the sound of Victor's steps faded into the smoke. The hidden central machine waited below, bright and awake now, and somewhere inside its glowing paths, another secret was beginning to open. Mara tightened her grip on the Ember Core and stepped into the next chamber, ready to face whatever the city had hidden from the world for so long, while her friends followed close behind and the fate of Halcyon held its breath. The chamber opened like the inside of a giant clock, with dark metal walls, glowing lines, and a low hum that seemed to press against the skin. Halcyon still breathed around them, but here below the city, the air felt older and heavier, like it had waited many years for someone to return. The hidden central machine stood in the center of the room, vast and silent in shape, yet awake in every light that ran through it. Mara was a young woman with black hair, and the Ember Core in her gloved hand cast warm gold across her determined face. Josh, a young man with dark brown hair, stepped in beside her with one hand near the tools on his chest harness. Abby, a young woman with blonde hair tied back tight, watched the room with sharp eyes and a steady jaw. Dr. Helen, a middle-aged woman with silver hair under a worn white laboratory coat, looked both tired and careful, as if every wall in this place could still surprise her. They all knew the danger now because Victor had shut them into the deeper half of Halcyon, and if they failed here, he would keep the city locked and hidden forever. The chamber answered their presence with a slow rise in light, and the machine paths on the floor began to shift like they were waking from sleep. A calm female voice crackled through old speakers above them, the Halcyon voice, and she spoke with careful control. She warned them that the central chamber was opening a sealed record path and that all access was being measured against the Ember core. That made Mara stop at once. The Ember core was not just a glowing item or a battery of light. It was a key made for this city, and its shifting luminous patterns were matching signs inside the machine itself. Josh looked down at his hands, then at the walls, and understood the same fear at the same time. If the core opened the wrong system, the city might lock down again and trap everyone in its lowest levels. If it opened the right one, then Halcyon would have to face the truth of what was buried here. Dr. Helen moved closer to a wall panel covered in dust and old markings, and she whispered that the machine was not only storing power, it was storing history. That was the first real crack in the mystery, and it changed the air in the room. This was not simply a battle over control. It was a battle over memory, and Victor wanted the memory hidden because it could ruin everything he had built. Far above them, Victor was still moving through the smoke-filled levels of Halcyon. He was a middle-aged man with slick black hair, a high-collar black coat with red trim, and a cold face that never showed doubt. Two black security guards followed him through the red emergency lights, their dark armored uniforms making them look like parts of the city itself. Victor did not think of himself as cruel, he thought of himself as necessary. He believed Halcyon had to stay sealed because the city above the underground had once fallen apart when people fought over its systems, its power, and the truth inside its deepest records. In his mind, the city was a fragile machine and truth was a blade that could cut the wrong hands. That was why he used control, fear, and the black static device in his palm. It was not only a weapon. It was his way to buy time while he reached the central chamber first. He wanted to find the record hidden inside the machine before Mara did, because he believed the Ember core would show proof that some people in Halcyon had helped build the original lock, and that proof could turn the city into open chaos. His motive made sense, but it also made him dangerous, because he trusted his own judgment more than the lives of everyone else. In the chamber, Abby found the first clear sign that Victor had not only chased them there, but had been expecting them for a long time. Along the side of the machine, behind a strip of moving light, she found a panel with old city marks and a hidden line of text. Josh cleaned the dust away with one careful swipe, and the words beneath were plain enough for all of them to read. The message said that the Ember core was created to wake the central machine only in the presence of a person who carried the city's sealed line. Mara stared at it in silence. Dr. Helen went pale, then told them the part she had not said before. She had once worked in the early research halls of Halcyon, long before Victor rose into power. She had seen records about the sealed line, and she had believed those records were lost. Now the machine was telling them the truth in open language. Mara was not just a visitor to this city. She was part of the reason the city had hidden its deepest door. That revelation hit her hard because it meant her chase had never been random. Someone in her own past had been tied to this place, and the Ember core had been waiting for her, not for Victor. The twist changed everything. Victor was not hunting a secret that might belong to anyone. He was trying to stop Mara from claiming a truth that was already hers to unlock. Before Mara could answer, the room trembled, and the heavy doors behind them began to grind shut again with a deep iron sound. Josh snapped his head around and swore the seal was stronger than the last one. Abby moved to the side controls, but the panel was already dead, as if the machine itself had chosen this moment to keep them inside. Then the Halcyon voice returned, calmer than before, and said that the chamber would only fully open if the Ember core accepted the truth in the memory vault. Mara stepped toward the center path, and every glowing line on the floor answered her movement with a pulse of gold and orange. She placed the Ember core into a shallow ring in the machine, and the whole room brightened in a sharp wave. The walls around them filled with moving images, not full pictures yet, but enough to show a city in its early days, bright towers, crowded streets, and a deep fear in the people who had built the underground seal. They had not buried the machine to gain power. They had buried it to keep one part of the city asleep because something inside the central system had become too unstable to use. Dr. Helen covered her mouth, realizing that the lock was not only a prison, it was also a warning. The city had survived all this time because someone had chosen restraint over control. Victor had never understood that. He had only seen the machine as a throne. Then the black security guards broke into the chamber through a side lift, and the calm in the room snapped apart. They moved fast, not to destroy the machine, but to cover Victor as he forced his way closer through the remaining hallways. One of them aimed a heavy light spreader that burst white glare across the floor, while the other drove a barrier cart into the machine path to slow Mara and her friends. Josh pulled the cart aside with a sudden wrench, his face tight with effort, and Abby moved low and fast to guard Dr. Helen. Mara did not run away from the light. She held her ground and watched the Ember core respond to the machine in her hands. The glowing code on its surface shifted again, and this time it formed a path. It was not a weapon path, it was a route through the deeper records. Mara understood at once that the Ember core was showing them where the final truth was hidden. Victor had wanted a lock, but the core was leading them to a map. The machine then projected the Halcyon map wall in bright lines across the chamber, and a single route lit up from the central tower marker down into a final locked chamber below. The path was clear, but the warning beside it was worse. The lower chamber was linked to the city power grid, and opening it without the right sequence could collapse half the underground system. The stakes had grown again, and now the choice was no longer simple. If they stopped, Victor would seal the truth forever. If they moved forward too fast, the city itself might fail. Mara looked at her friends, and for the first time since this long descent began, her fear did not control her. She had spent so much of her life chasing answers alone that she had forgotten what trust felt like. But Josh was still beside her, steady and ready. Abby was still watching every angle, never wasting a second. Dr. Helen was still thinking clearly, even with her old secrets now exposed. Mara saw that they were not just helping her, they were carrying the same choice with her. She told them to stay close, and she stepped onto the lit path in the machine floor. The chamber responded at once, and the hidden central machine opened another layer with a deep, living hum. Above them, Victor shouted from somewhere beyond the sealed hall, his voice sharp with urgency and anger, but his words were lost in the surge of light. He had lost control of the room, and he knew it. Mara could feel that the next chamber was already waiting, and whatever the city had buried there was far bigger than a simple record. It was the reason Halcyon had been shaped into a maze of sealed streets and silent towers. The machine was ready to tell more, but only if they dared to keep going. Mara raised the Ember core, followed the glowing line forward, and led her team toward the final locked chamber as the city held its breath around them. The glowing line on the floor led deeper under Halcyon, and the air became colder with every step. The underground city around them felt like a giant held breath, with dim towers above, red warning lights in the walls, and sealed doors lining the narrow passage. Mara walked first because the Ember core in her hand pulsed warm gold and orange, and the light from it made the dark corridor look alive. She was a young woman with black hair, a dark-fitted tactical coat, fingerless gloves, and sturdy boots, and her face stayed hard with focus even as fear pressed around her. Behind her came Josh, a young man with dark brown hair, a gray utility jacket, dark pants, and a chest harness covered in tools, and he kept glancing at the corners because he trusted danger more than silence. Abby followed close behind, a young woman with blonde hair tied back tightly, a navy combat vest, a black long-sleeve shirt, and a utility belt, and her sharp eyes kept scanning every wall for movement. Dr. Helen moved in the middle, a middle-aged woman with silver hair, a worn white laboratory coat, practical boots, and a tired but thoughtful expression, and she carried the weight of old knowledge like a stone in her chest. They all knew the same thing now, and it had already changed the shape of their mission. The next chamber was not just a room. It was the reason Halcyon had been buried, sealed, and turned into a maze. If they turned back, Victor would keep control, and the city would stay locked in fear. If they went forward, they might find the truth, but they might also wake something that Halcyon had spent years trying to hide. The corridor opened into a wide chamber with a giant map wall built into stone and metal. The Halcyon map wall glowed with pale lines, showing districts, tower markers, and one final chamber deep below the city center. Mara stepped closer, and the Ember core answered the map with a brighter pulse. Tiny light paths moved across the panel, then settled on a point beneath the central tower marker, where the final locked chamber waited like a buried heart. Dr. Helen lifted a hand and her tired face tightened as she studied the display. She had spent her life inside Halcyon records and she had always known the city held secrets, but this was larger than her worst guess. She looked at Mara and spoke with careful calm. Halcyon was not only built to shelter people underground, it was also built to keep something asleep. The sealed districts were not random, they were barriers. The ancient machine below the city could wake every district at once, but it could also shut them down if the wrong person held the controls. That was why Victor had chased the Ember core from the start. He did not want only power. He wanted the right to decide who lived safely above and who stayed trapped below. Abby folded her arms and anger flashed in her eyes because she understood the cost in plain words. If Victor held the machine, he could keep any district closed forever. Josh crouched by the glowing panel and touched the edge of the map, then looked up with a tense, uneasy face. He said the city did not just look controlled. It looked designed to obey. Mara listened in silence, and her grip on the Ember core tightened until the warm light shone over her gloves. She had begun this journey wanting answers about the city, but now she could see the bigger shape of the trap. Halcyon had been turned into a cage, and the key had been hidden inside the cage itself. A low speaker crackled overhead, and the calm female voice of Halcyon filled the chamber again. Access to the final chamber required full Ember authorization, it said. Unauthorized entry could trigger district lockdown. Its tone was careful, almost gentle, but that only made it more frightening. The machine was not angry, it was following its purpose. The voice explained what none of them had fully understood yet. The city systems were tied to the hidden central machine below. The machine could open sealed streets, restore power, or lock entire zones shut in a single command. Long ago, when panic first spread through Halcyon, the leaders had chosen safety through control. They had hidden the machine, sealed the command paths, and told the people that the deepest levels were too dangerous to enter. Victor had learned the truth later, and he had built his rule around it. He used the fear of the machine to justify his grip on the city, while secretly searching for the Ember core that could unlock the final chamber. Dr. Helen whispered that Victor must have known the machine was not just a tool, but a judge of access. It would answer the person who carried the Ember core because the core was made from the same system that powered the old city network. That meant the Ember core was not only a key, it was also a witness. Mara looked at the glowing lines inside the core and felt a chill move through her. If the core was built from the same ancient system, then someone had planned all of this from the start. Someone had known that the truth would one day return. Before anyone could speak again, the chamber doors behind them slammed shut with a deep metal boom, and red lights burst to life across the ceiling. 2 black security guards stepped out of the side corridor with weapons raised and armor dark against the glow. Black Security Guard 1 was a human man with dark hair hidden under a covered helmet, average build, and a strict posture. Black Security Guard 2 was another human man with dark hair hidden under a covered helmet, average build, and a strict posture. They did not speak, they only blocked the path, steady and ready, while Victor appeared behind them with his slick black hair, high-collar black coat with red trim, and cold, confident stare. He looked calm, but his eyes had the sharp focus of a man who had just reached the edge of losing control. Victor told Mara that she had gone far enough. He said the city needed order, not hope. He said the machine below was too dangerous for people like her, because people always broke what they did not understand. But his voice had a crack in it now because the room had already turned against him. The Halcyon voice spoke again through the speakers, and this time its words carried a warning for everyone. Unauthorized seizure of the central machine would collapse district balance. Emergency systems would respond to the Ember core alone. Victor flinched at that because the machine had just exposed his fear. He had never truly controlled Halcyon. He had only controlled the story told to the people. Abby saw the opening first. She stepped in front of Josh and forced the nearest guard to retreat with a hard shove and a quick strike to the weapon arm, while Josh threw a tool from his harness that clamped onto the floor and blocked the second guard long enough for him to stumble back. Mara did not chase Victor yet. She looked instead at the chamber wall where a second seam began to glow under the Ember core light. The machine was reacting. The final locked chamber was opening on its own. That was the first real twist, and it made the room feel smaller in an instant. Victor had not brought them here to stop them. He had brought them here because he thought the core would open the chamber for him. But the machine was choosing Mara instead. The wall split apart with a heavy groan, and a deep stairway dropped below like a path into the city itself. Cold air poured up from beneath, carrying dust, old metal, and the faint hum of power that had not been heard for years. Mara stepped to the edge and looked down into the opening. Far below waited the hidden central machine, a vast ancient structure with cables, locked panels, and glowing control paths stretching through the darkness. It was not a monster, and it was not magic. It was a great buried system built to wake the city and command its sealed districts. Dr. Helen stared in stunned silence because she could finally see the truth of every missing record. The city had never been abandoned by accident. It had been managed like a locked vault. Victor had wanted to keep that vault closed so no one could learn who benefited from the silence, and now his reason became clear at last. If the lower districts were ever opened, the people inside them would learn that many of their losses were not random. They were the result of careful choices made by men like Victor, who feared change more than justice. That truth hit Mara harder than any guard strike could have. She had believed she was chasing a secret about the city. Instead, she had found a system built to hide people from each other. Victor made one final move. He pulled a black static device from inside his coat and threw it to the floor between them. Bright static exploded in a harsh flash, filling the chamber with sparks and white noise. Josh and Abby turned away, blinded for a moment, and the guards used the cover to retreat toward Victor. The static did not destroy anything, but it gave him enough space to escape. He backed toward the stairway, his face cold again, and he promised that Mara would regret opening the door. Yet even as he left, the chamber floor continued to pulse under the Ember core, and the machine far below began to answer her presence. Mara stood in the center of the flashing red light, the core warm in her hand, and for the first time she did not feel small inside Halcyon. She felt chosen, and she felt afraid, and she felt ready. The truth was alive under her feet, the city was waking, and whatever came next would decide whether Halcyon remained a prison or became a home again. She looked to Josh, Abby, and Dr. Helen, and they all understood without words that the next descent had begun, even if the city itself was not ready to face it yet. Halcyon shuddered around them like a giant machine coming awake after a long sleep. Red lights pulsed along the walls, and distant towers glowed behind thick glass tunnels, while heavy steel doors sat closed in every direction. The city felt alive but tired, and every sound carried through the stone like a warning. Mara stood in the middle of it all with the Ember core warm in her hand, and the small glow made her fingers steady even while her heart beat hard. She was a young woman with black hair, a dark-fitted tactical coat, glowing ember lines, fingerless gloves, and sturdy boots, and she had spent most of her life feeling like Halcyon had made her small. Now that feeling was breaking. Josh stood close by, a young man with dark brown hair, a gray utility jacket, dark pants, and a chest harness full of tools, watching every hallway with tense, alert eyes. Abby, a young woman with blonde hair tied back tightly, wore a navy combat vest, a black long-sleeve shirt, and a utility belt, and she kept her hands ready because she trusted danger more than silence. Dr. Helen, a middle-aged woman with silver hair, a worn white laboratory coat, and tired, thoughtful eyes, studied the shifting patterns on the Ember core and understood that the city itself was speaking through it. The core was not just light. It was a key, and the key had been waiting for someone brave enough to carry it deeper. The problem was simple now, even if the city was not. If Victor reached the hidden central machine first, he could lock Halcyon down forever and keep its people under his control. If Mara reached it first, the city might open sealed districts, reveal hidden truths, and maybe finally become a home instead of a cage. That choice hung over them as they stepped toward the next descent. They reached the Halcyon map wall, a huge glowing panel set into stone and metal with district lines, tower markers, and a final locked chamber deep below. The map looked old, but it was still alive with thin lights that moved when the Ember core came near. Dr. Helen lifted a hand and pointed to the lowest mark. That chamber was sealed on purpose, she said in a calm voice that still carried fear. The hidden central machine is under there, and it was built to wake the city in stages. Josh bent closer and frowned at the map. Then why hide it from everyone? He asked. Helen looked at Mara before she answered, because the machine does not only power the city, it records every command, every seal, and every override. If someone selfish controls it, they can rewrite life here. Abby crossed her arms and gave the wall a hard look. So Victor wants power, and he wants the machine to make it permanent. Yes, Helen said, but there is more. The machine was also built to protect the districts from collapse after the old system failed. Mara listened and felt the truth settle deeper in her chest. Halcyon had not been built as a prison at first. It had been built as a shelter, then twisted into a cage by fear, secrecy, and control. The Ember core began to glow brighter, and thin gold lines appeared on the map wall, tracing a route to the locked chamber. Mara touched the lit path and a hidden panel slid open with a low grinding sound. Cold air breathed out from below, carrying dust, metal, and the faint hum of a sleeping giant. The next descent had begun for real, and there was no easy way back. They moved down a narrow stairway that spiraled into deeper black stone, with old cables wrapped along the walls like veins. The air grew colder with every step, and the red emergency lights became thinner and farther apart. Josh went first, checking each landing with careful hands, while Abby covered the rear and kept her shoulders squared. Dr. Helen stayed near Mara, speaking only when needed because she knew the city sometimes listened. The Halcyon voice came through a speaker overhead, calm and careful as always. Warning, restricted systems ahead, clearance not recognized. Abby looked up at the dark speaker. That voice has always sounded like it knows more than it says, she muttered. Helen nodded once. It was designed to guide people away from danger, but it also learned to wait. Mara held the Ember core out in front of her, and the warm light made the wall cables glow faintly in return. Then the core flashed, and a hidden pattern spread across its cracked surface like a living code. The symbols matched a set of locked nodes ahead, and a low vibration rolled under their boots. Josh stopped at a landing and pointed toward a side corridor. Someone is here, he said. At the end of the hall stood two black security guards, both human men in dark armored uniforms with covered faces, strict posture, and heavy boots that made no wasted noise. Black Security Guard 1 blocked the left side, while Black Security Guard 2 held the right. They did not speak at first. They only raised their weapons and waited for Victor to arrive. Abby stepped forward, eyes sharp. "You are in our way," she said. The first guard answered in a flat voice, "We are keeping order." Mara almost laughed at that, but there was no humor in it. "No," she said, her own voice firm now. "You are keeping fear alive." The guards advanced, and the hall filled with tension. Josh grabbed a hanging tool cable and yanked it loose, sending sparks across the floor and forcing one guard back. Abby moved fast and slammed her shoulder into the other, driving him into the wall with a hard metallic crash. Neither side wanted to truly hurt the other, but everyone wanted the path clear. Then the lights burst white for one awful second, and the hall went dim again. Victor stepped out of the smoke with his high-collar black coat and red trim, his slick black hair in perfect place, and his cold, confident stare fixed on Mara. He looked calm in the middle of the chaos, which made him more frightening than any shout could have been. In his hand was the black static device, small and ugly, designed to burst into bright static and sparks. "You should have stayed above," Victor said, as if he were speaking to a child who had misread a warning sign. Mara held the Ember core tighter and did not move back. "You sealed people away," she said. "You made this city sick." Victor gave a small, tired smile. "I made this city stable," he replied. "Without control, the lower districts would tear themselves apart, and the upper levels would panic. People always ask for freedom until freedom costs them safety." Dr. Helen stepped forward then, and her voice turned hard. "You are not protecting them, you are protecting your own rule." Victor did not deny it. That silence told Mara everything she needed to know. He wanted the hidden central machine because it could lock the districts, reroute power, and erase the records of his actions. He feared the machine because it could also reveal the truth of what he had hidden from the city for years. The Ember core suddenly flared in Mara's hand, and the hall lights aligned with it like they recognized a rightful command. Victor saw that change, and for the first time his expression tightened. He pressed the black static device, and a burst of bright noise exploded through the corridor. The guards raised their arms to shield their eyes. Josh shouted and pulled Mara down behind a broken support pillar. Abby crouched beside them, while Dr. Helen shielded the Ember core with both hands. Static sparks danced across the floor, and the passage filled with blind light. Victor used the moment to retreat toward the lower chamber, but Mara caught one more thing before he vanished. The machine lights on the walls reacted to the core, not to Victor. That meant the city had chosen a different key. It had chosen her. When the static faded, the corridor was split open by a deep metal door sliding slowly aside. Beyond it lay a chamber so large that its ceiling vanished into darkness, with cables hanging like roots and glowing control paths stretching across the floor. In the center waited the hidden central machine, vast and ancient, surrounded by sealed consoles and ringed lights that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. Mara stared at it and felt the scale of it all at once. This was not just a power source, it was the heart of Halcyon. It had carried the city through fear, through silence, and through every locked district, and now it was waking because the Ember core had answered it. Dr. Helen whispered almost to herself, it was built to protect people, but someone turned protection into control. Josh moved closer and found a side panel with old markings. There are manual paths here, he said. If we can reach the center controls, we might stop Victor from sealing everything again. Abby scanned the chamber edges and pointed to moving shadows below a catwalk. He is not alone, she warned. 2 more guard shapes moved in the dark, and that meant Victor had prepared this place well. Mara took one careful breath and understood the bigger truth at last. Her fear had never been proof that she was weak. Her fear had been proof that she understood what was at stake. She looked at Josh, Abby, and Dr. Helen, and each of them gave her the same answer without speaking. They would stay, they would fight for the truth. Mara lifted the Ember core higher, and the hidden machine answered with a deep rising hum. Far above them, sealed corridors began to unlock one by one, and Halcyon shivered as if a long-trapped voice was trying to speak. Victor, somewhere ahead in the chamber shadows, was trying to reach the center control before them. The city was waking faster now, and the next step would decide who controlled the truth, who held the future, and who would be forced to retreat. The air in the deep city felt colder now, and every metal wall in Halcyon seemed to hold its breath. Red warning lights flashed across broken pipes, while the glow from the Ember core painted Mara, Josh, Abby, and Dr. Helen in warm gold against the black stone corridors. The city was no longer asleep. It was listening, it was opening, and it was preparing to show a truth that had been hidden for far too long. Mara stood at the front with her black hair pulled tight, her dark tactical coat marked by ember lines that pulsed with the core in her hand. She had always wanted answers, but now she wanted something bigger. She wanted the city to stop lying. Josh, with his dark brown hair and gray utility jacket, kept checking the corridor behind them because he knew Victor would not stop at one locked door. Abby, with her blonde hair tied back and her sharp eyes fixed ahead, stayed close and ready because she trusted action more than promises. Dr. Helen, with her silver hair and tired face, moved carefully beside them because she understood the old systems better than anyone and knew how dangerous a waking machine could become. The danger was clear now. If Victor reached the center control first, he could shut the city down into silence, seal away the records, and keep the people of Halcyon trapped inside his version of the past. If Mara reached it first, she might expose everything Victor had buried, but she might also awaken something the city had been forced to hide for generations. A deep hum rolled through the floor, and the hidden central machine answered the Ember core with a slow, heavy pulse. Above them, more sealed corridors unlocked with long, grinding sounds, and far away, old speaker systems crackled back to life. Then the Halcyon voice spoke again, calm and careful, like a guide speaking through a storm. Central access is opening. Warning, memory locks are failing. Unknown override in progress. Abby glanced up at the ceiling where thin strips of light flickered in and out. That machine sounds awake now, she said, her voice low and tight. Dr. Helen nodded once. It was built to manage the city, but someone later used it to manage people. That was the real wound inside Halcyon. The city had not only been built to shelter lives underground. It had been turned into a cage of old rules, secret archives, and controlled truth. Victor believed fear was necessary because he thought people would panic if they learned how much of their history had been edited. He told himself that order was kindness. He told himself that control was protection. But his idea of protection was a locked room with no windows, and Mara had finally decided she would rather face the dark than live inside a lie. Josh found a narrow side passage and pointed at a glowing wall map built into stone and steel. The Halcyon map wall showed district lines, a central tower marker, and one final chamber below them all. A red path blinked toward the center. He is ahead of us, Josh said, not by much, but enough to matter. Mara stepped closer and studied the map while the Ember core in her hand shifted with tiny luminous patterns, as if the hidden code inside it was trying to speak. Then the machine sent a new pulse and a fresh path lit up on the map, one that had not been there before. Dr. Helen's tired face sharpened with surprise. That route was never on the public map, she said. It is a maintenance path and only the oldest core systems would know it. Mara looked at the path, then at the others, and understood the choice in front of them. The city was helping them, but only because the Ember core had unlocked a memory that was still alive inside the machine. That made the stakes even higher because the truth was not just hidden, it was protected. They moved fast through the maintenance path, with Josh leading and Abby covering the back. The corridor was narrow, with old cable bundles hanging from the ceiling and thin streams of light leaking through cracked panels. Every few steps, the city groaned around them like a giant waking up after a long nightmare. Then they reached a large chamber where two black security guards waited near a sealed steel gate. Their dark armored uniforms caught the red light, and their covered faces made them look like silent walls. Black Security Guard 1 raised a weapon built for control, not war, while Black Security Guard 2 stepped to the side to block the route forward. "Victor said nobody gets through," one guard barked. Mara did not waste time arguing. She lifted the Ember core, and the glowing code spread across the floor in gold lines. The hidden machine answered at once, and the chamber lights flared so bright that both guards hesitated. Josh rushed left and slammed a control panel with his tool harness, forcing one door lock to jam. Abby darted right, her movements quick and clean, and drove the other guard back from the gate. Dr. Helen shouted for everyone to keep low as old warning beams crossed the chamber in sweeping bands. The clash lasted only a few seconds, but it changed everything. The guards were not trying to win, they were trying to slow them until Victor reached the center control. Mara saw that clearly now. Victor was not simply fleeing. He was running a full plan, and each delay was part of it. When the lights settled, the two guards retreated into a side hall, ordered away by a harsh voice over their helmets. Victor was not far ahead. He was close enough to hear, close enough to strike, and close enough to make the next mistake count. Then Victor finally appeared at the far end of the chamber, stepping from the shadows with his slick black hair neat and unmoved, his high collar coat sharp under the red light. He looked calm, but his eyes were hard and cold, because he believed the city belonged to discipline, not to memory. "You should have stayed out of this," he said, his voice smooth and severe. "You still do not understand what the truth will do." Mara faced him without lowering the Ember core. "The truth does not belong to you," she said. "It belongs to everyone who has lived here." Victor gave a small, almost pitying smile. "That is where you are wrong. Truth can break a city. Panic can destroy families. Fear makes people dangerous, so someone must choose what they are allowed to know." His words were the heart of his motive, and they were twisted, but they were not random. Victor had once watched Halcyon nearly collapse during an earlier system failure, when people fought over scarce air, power, and space. Since then, he had decided that secret control was safer than open choice. He had hidden records, blocked districts, and used the machine to keep the city quiet because he truly believed chaos was worse than lies. That was why he had stolen influence, why he had built his black security network, and why he wanted the center control now. He thought he was saving Halcyon from itself. Mara almost understood him, but understanding did not make him right. Josh stepped beside her and said, "You are not saving them, you are deciding for them." Abby lifted her chin and added, "That is not safety, that is control." Victor turned his cold stare toward Dr. Helen, and for the first time his face changed. She had worked on the early city systems, and he knew she could expose what he had done. "Helen," he said quietly, "you were supposed to keep the old records sealed." Dr. Helen looked back at him with a sadness that made her seem older than the room. "I helped build the locks," she replied, "but I did not know they would be used to hide lives." That was the twist Mara had not expected. Dr. Helen had not only been a witness. She had once helped design the very system Victor now used, but she had never intended it to become a weapon of silence. Her guilt was real, and so was her courage now. She had come here to fix what her work had helped create. Victor took one step back toward the center gate, and the black device in his hand flashed. A burst of bright static exploded through the chamber, scattering sparks across the floor and blinding everyone for a moment. Mara shielded her eyes, and Josh cursed under his breath as alarms screamed from the walls. The chamber shook harder now, because the hidden central machine was reacting to the Ember core and Victor's override at the same time. The gate ahead began to open in slow, heavy layers, revealing a vast chamber below with cables, glowing control paths, and a towering machine buried deep under Halcyon. The scale of it made even Abby stop for one breath. This was the heart of the city, the place where sealed districts were watched, powered, and controlled. Victor moved toward it through the smoke, but Mara ran after him. She could feel the Ember core growing warmer, and its hidden code was changing faster, as if the machine inside the city recognized her choice. "If you reach that control, you can erase the record paths," Dr. Helen shouted. "If Mara reaches it, the city will open the rest of the memory vaults." That meant the next moment would decide more than one fight. It would decide whether Halcyon stayed a prison of edited history or became a city that could finally remember itself. Josh shoved open a side panel and brought a lift platform to life. Abby held the rear line and kept Victor from closing the distance, while Mara stepped onto the platform with the Ember core held high. The machine below pulsed again, and a new voice rose through the chamber speakers, not cold like the old alarms, but deep and strained, as if the city itself was waking to speak for the first time. Then the floor lights shifted, and a hidden bridge began to extend toward the central machine. Victor froze for a fraction of a second, shocked by what the city had chosen. Mara saw that opening, but she also saw something else. On the far side of the chamber, another sealed door was unlocking, one that even Dr. Helen did not recognize. Whatever was behind it, it had been waiting longer than the rest. Mara tightened her grip on the Ember core, knowing the path ahead had just changed again, and the truth of Halcyon was now closer than ever. But the city was not finished revealing its secrets, and Victor was not finished fighting for control. The next step would take them deeper, where the oldest lies still waited in the dark. The chamber beneath Halcyon felt colder than the levels above, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Red warning lights washed over the steel walls, the stone floor, and the faces of the people standing in that tense silence. Mara stood near the center of the room with the Ember core glowing in her hand, its warm gold light fighting against the dark. Josh stayed close beside her, ready and alert, with his tools hanging from the chest harness of his gray utility jacket. Abby watched the far side of the chamber with her sharp, focused eyes, while Dr. Helen stared at a sealed door that none of them had expected to move. Even Victor, with his slick black hair and cold, severe stare, looked less calm than before because the city had just opened another path without asking him. The problem was now clear to everyone. They were not alone in Halcyon. The city was reacting to the Ember core, and if Victor reached the hidden machine first, he could use the old systems to control every sealed district below. That would trap Mara and her friends inside a city built to obey one man, while the truth of Halcyon stayed buried forever. The sealed door on the far side gave a deep metallic groan, then unlocked with a slow and careful sound. A line of pale light appeared around its edge, then spread wider as ancient locks gave way one by one. Dr. Helen stepped forward, her worn white laboratory coat brushing against the metal floor, and her tired face changed at once from surprise to fear. She had studied maps, records, and machine logs for years, but she had never seen this door in any file. "This should not be here," she said in a low and serious voice. This chamber was hidden from the main city plans. Abby glanced at her. "Hidden by who?" she asked. Dr. Helen shook her head. "By the people who built Halcyon." That answer settled over the room like dust. Victor finally smiled, but there was no warmth in it. He had wanted this kind of discovery because it gave him a new chance to seize power. Victor wanted Halcyon because he believed control was the only way to survive. He did not trust people, he did not trust freedom, and he did not trust a city that could wake itself. In his mind, if one person held the central machine, then chaos could be avoided and the world below could be ordered by force. That belief made him dangerous because he saw every living person as a problem to manage. Behind him, Black Security Guard 1 and Black Security Guard 2 stood with strict posture in their dark armored uniforms, ready to carry out his next order without question. Mara lifted the Ember core higher, and the shifting luminous patterns inside it began to move faster. The glow touched the door, then the walls, then the map panel set into the stone beside them. The Halcyon map wall brightened at once, showing district lines, blocked routes, and a central tower marker that blinked over and over as if warning them to stop. At the bottom of the map, a final chamber lit up in a deep amber color, hidden far below everything else. Josh leaned in and traced the route with one finger. "That is the real center," he said, "not the tower, under it." Dr. Helen looked at the Ember core, and a hard truth seemed to settle in her eyes. "I think the core is not only a key," she said. "I think it is a memory lock. It carries a code that the old machine can read." Mara looked down at the small glowing object in her hand. It had seemed powerful before, but now it felt personal, almost like a message left by someone who wanted this exact group to find the truth. That was the twist that changed everything. The Ember core was not just opening doors, it was guiding them toward a place that had been sealed on purpose. Someone in the distant past had hidden the hidden central machine, and someone had also hidden the reason it was built. The city had not merely failed, it had been arranged to sleep. Victor clearly understood that the moment had turned against him, so he moved first. He pulled out the black static device from inside his coat and raised it toward the room. Enough, he said, cold and sharp. I am not letting you hand this city over to guesswork. He pressed the device and a burst of bright static exploded through the chamber. Sparks jumped across the floor, lights flickered, and the old speakers shrieked with a broken wave of noise. The Halcyon voice came through in a calm but strained tone. Warning, unauthorized disruption detected. Central access under threat. Its voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, steady and careful even as the room shook. Abby shielded her face and stumbled back. Josh grabbed her arm and pulled her behind a steel pillar. Mara turned away just enough to protect the Ember core, but the blast still drove her back a step. One of the black guards rushed forward while the other moved to block the side passage, both of them strict and silent under their covered helmets. Victor used the chaos well because that was how he always worked. He never needed trust if fear could do the job instead. He wanted the team split apart, the core separated from Mara, and the path to the hidden machine cleared before anyone could think clearly. But the city was already changing around them. The floor trembled again, and the sealed door at the far side opened wider, revealing a long stairwell that led down into deeper darkness. Cold air rose from below, carrying the smell of old metal and dust that had not been disturbed in years. Dr. Helen stared into that opening with a strange and painful look, because she suddenly realized something that none of the others had yet understood. I have seen this style before, she whispered, not in the city records, in my father's notes. Mara looked at her and Helen continued in a rush as if the truth had finally broken free. My father worked on the earliest Halcyon designs. He did not build the city to rule people. He helped build it to hide something from them and from himself. That revelation hit hard because it meant the oldest lie was not only about power, it was about fear. The founders of Halcyon had not trapped a machine to control the future. They had trapped it because waking it too soon would wake a larger system tied to every sealed district, every locked power line, and every hidden chamber below. If Victor forced the machine awake without understanding the rules, he could flood the city with old commands that nobody could stop. Mara felt the weight of that truth settle on her shoulders. The Ember core in her hand pulsed once, then showed a new pattern, almost like an arrow pointing down. It was clear now. The core was not calling them to victory, it was calling them to responsibility. Victor saw the hesitation in Mara's face, and that was enough for him to make his next move. He shouted for his guards to close in, and both black-armored men obeyed at once. One rushed toward Josh, forcing him back with a hard shove into the pillar, while the other lunged toward Abby, trying to drive her away from the open stairwell. Abby moved fast, ducking under the guard's reach and swinging her shoulder into his side, forcing him to stagger. Josh kicked a loose tool case across the floor, making the guard near him stumble long enough for Josh to break free. Mara did not run. She planted her feet, held the Ember core in both hands, and stared Victor down across the broken light. Victor expected her to panic because he had always believed fear made people easy to steer, but Mara had changed since entering Halcyon. She was no longer only chasing answers. She was protecting people, and that gave her a steadier heart than he had. You want control because you are scared, she said. You think fear makes you strong, but it only makes you blind. Victor's face tightened, and for the first time his confidence cracked. He answered with anger instead of charm. Blind people survive, he said. Hope gets them hurt. Mara did not step back. Then you have been hurting yourself for a long time. That line cut deeper than any weapon because it named the truth he tried to hide. Victor did not seek power because he was certain. He sought it because he was afraid of what he could not command. The Halcyon voice spoke again, quieter now as the room shifted under them. Secondary chamber unlocked, central descent available. Its calm tone made the warning feel even worse because it meant the city had accepted the next step whether they were ready or not. The open stairwell below glowed with faint amber strips, but those lights were old and unstable, and they pulsed like a heart trying to remember how to beat. Dr. Helen stepped beside Mara, and for the first time since this journey began, she did not look like a tired scholar lost in her own notes. She looked like a woman who had finally chosen a side. I can help read the old systems, she said. If we go down there, I need to be with you. Josh nodded at once. Abby tightened the strap of her utility belt and took her place on Mara's other side. Mara glanced at each of them, then at the Ember core, then at the dark stairwell that led toward the hidden machine. She knew this was the next real test. They could turn back and leave Halcyon sleeping, which might keep the city safe for a little longer. Or they could go deeper, face the oldest locked chamber, and risk waking something that could either save the city or break it open forever. Victor was still behind them, still dangerous, still determined to seize control. The black guards were still regrouping, and the static device still smoked in his hand. Yet even with all that danger pressing close, Mara did not feel the same fear she had felt before. The truth had changed her. She understood now that Halcyon was not only a machine city. It was a warning, a buried promise, and a test left by people who were gone. Mara tightened her grip on the Ember core and took the first step toward the stairwell, while the others moved with her into the dark. Behind them, Victor watched with a hard, unreadable face, and the last sealed chamber waited below, still silent, still hidden, and still full of answers that no one had earned yet. The stairwell dropped fast into a colder part of Halcyon, where red warning lights blinked over steel walls and old pipes hummed with tired power. Mara led the way, and the Ember core in her hand cast warm gold light across her black hair, her dark coat, and her focused face. Josh followed close behind, his dark brown hair damp with sweat, his tools ready at his chest. Abby came next, her blonde hair tied back tight, her eyes sharp and steady. Dr. Helen brought up the rear, her silver hair shining faintly in the dim light, while the Halcyon voice spoke softly through broken speakers, warning them that the last chamber was active and unstable. They had come this far because the city was failing, and if Victor reached the hidden machine first, he could wake sealed districts for himself and trap every lower level in his control. They reached a huge map wall carved into stone and metal, and its bright lines showed Halcyon from top to bottom. Mara stared at the glowing marker deep below the central tower, then saw something that made her stop cold. The Ember core was not only a key, it was also a lock built to answer the city and judge the person who carried it. Dr. Helen understood it first, and her tired face tightened with grief because she realized the builders had never meant the core to give power to one ruler. They had meant it to protect the city from greed. That was why Victor wanted it so badly, because he had known the truth longer than he had admitted, and he had planned to use the hidden machine to turn the sealed districts into his own throne. Victor stepped out of the shadows with two black security guards beside him, both men in dark armored uniforms with covered faces and strict posture. He held up a small black static device, and a burst of bright sparks filled the hall, forcing the team to shield their eyes. When the light faded, Victor offered Mara one last chance to hand over the Ember core and walk away. Instead, Mara looked at the map, looked at her friends, and finally understood that fear had kept Halcyon trapped for years. She would not let it rule her too. Josh and Abby drove the guards back with a fierce rush, while Dr. Helen fed the core into the final control slot. The hidden central machine woke with a deep thunder, and every seal across the city answered in sequence. Halcyon voice returned, calm and clear, and named Mara as the first true keeper of the city. Victor tried to seize the console, but the machine rejected him and locked him out. He was forced to retreat into the dark, his control broken at last. In the end, Mara did not just save Halcyon. She accepted it. She chose trust over fear, and the lonely girl who had entered the dark became the leader the city had been waiting for.